The morning the whole thing unraveled, I heard wood splinter like a drumstick on a picnic table, sharp, hollow cracks cutting across the pasture, and I thought for a second that a storm had finally taken a tree down. But then I stepped onto the porch, coffee still warm in my hand, and I saw them hulking silhouettes moving through the dawn mist, slow as history, walking straight into the HOA's perfect little white picket world. And I laughed, which surprised me because laughing felt safer than anything else in that moment. You have to picture it, the fence they'd bragged about for months, folding under 1,000 pounds of horn and muscle like it was made of cardboard. 2 days earlier, the HOA president, Karen Perfect Hair Clipboard Attitude, had welded a padlock on my ranch gate, smiling like she'd locked up a problem. She didn't know she was locking in the very thing that would teach her a lesson. My name is Jack Turner. I'm 54, and I was born with dirt under my fingernails. The house I grew up in smelled like hay and diesel and old leather. My granddad carved this place out of open country. We raised bison because they're stubborn and honest, two traits that run in my family like a stubborn river. Bison move like slow thunder. When they look at you, you feel the weight of generations. They don't read rule books. At first, the new development was a curiosity. Clean roofs poking up on the horizon, manicured lawns, and people who thought country living was a weekend costume. I told myself we'd be fine as long as they stayed on their side of the fence. But Karen didn't take "stay on your side" as a suggestion. She took it as a challenge. She was the kind of person who can make a hello sound like a reprimand, clipboard in hand, sunglasses large enough to block empathy. It began, small, neat letters slipped into my mailbox with polite requests. Could I ask my drivers to be quieter? Could I restrict deliveries to certain hours? I ignored them because my cows get hungry at the wrong hours, whether a brochure says otherwise or not. Then signs went up, "No unauthorized vehicles," big bold letters at the turnout by order of the HOA. Decorative, technically meaningless, but someone stopped my delivery guy at the sign and sent him away. That's when I realized this wasn't about peace, it was about control. Little things escalated into a pattern. Men I didn't know wandering my fence line with phones out claiming inspections. A speed bump dumped across the shared road overnight, no county permit, just asphalt like a black scar. Anonymous complaints to animal control about underfed livestock that required a polite officer to apologize before leaving. A drone buzzing 20 feet above my herd until one of the cows mock charged it and it fled. The creek that waters the lower pasture got a plywood dam, overnight sandbags, a wooden wedge blocking flow. My troughs dropped half empty. That one was illegal and I filed the complaint, but government wheels move like freight trains, slow and heavy. Then came the padlock. Not looped, not temporary, welded right through the chain. I had a hay truck due in an hour. I cut the lock off with bolt cutters while my ranch hand Luke watched jaw tight. We put the metal carcass in the truck bed like evidence. I called the sheriff. He took photos, filed a report, and said the right words: easement rights don't allow someone to block your access. But he also said something else. This was petty, and petty can be persistent. That lock changed everything because once someone crosses from annoyance into interference with legal access, you've got leverage. Karen thought she was tightening the leash. What she didn't know was that she'd handed me the leverage to flip the whole thing. I stopped reacting and started observing. In a town like ours, information comes cheap if you know where to get it, at the diner after coffee, by leaning on the counter and listening to the booths. Phil and Denise, two HOA board members, argued about budgets while I pretended to read the paper. Phil complained the fence had been neglected. Denise said Karen was holding repairs hostage until she got her landscaping paid for. I walked the southern fence with a camera the next morning and photographed every leaning post, every warped rail, every place rot had turned wood into confetti. I measured gaps where wire had been patched so many times it looked like a quilt. I saved copies of every letter, every anonymous complaint, the drone footage I'd shot when it hovered over my herd. I made a file, dates times license plates when I could get them, because you never know when a paper trail will be the difference between being believed and being gaslit. I called an old friend, Mike, who works in zoning, asking about liability in a hypothetical way. He chuckled and confirmed my suspicion. If your neighbor keeps bison, the adjacent property has to maintain a barrier sufficient for the species. In plain terms, if your fence is a joke and a 1,000-pound bull pads your flower beds, that's on you. That little nugget was pure gold. It turned their crumbling perimeter from a cosmetic failing into an actionable risk. I didn't rush into anything. I fixed my own fences, I waved at HOA members as they drove by, played the patient neighbor while I watched the sagging posts like a man watching a simmering pot. I bought trail cameras and set them on the weakest stretch. Earl Simmons and Tom Red Mallister, two fellow ranchers whose land also pressed against that fence, agreed to be ready. We didn't have to conspire much, we just had to be present. Mother Nature helped. A summer storm rolled through one-night wind like a freight train rained sideways. By morning, the HOA fence sagged worse in 3 spots. 2 maintenance guys walked, the line shook their heads and walked away. The board couldn't agree to emergency repairs, they needed a vote, and the next meeting was 6 weeks away. The foundation was failing and the HOA was busy rearranging deck chairs. Then Karen outdid herself again. She welded a new plate across my gate, bolted a no access sign, and smiled as if she'd bought a moral victory. I could have cut it that second, smashed a window of authority, filed for immediate injunctions, but I didn't. I walked to the interior gate, the one between my herd and the HOA line, and unlatched it. I didn't prod the animals, I didn't shout. Bison graze, they wander, and when grass looks greener on the other side, curiosity is contagious. Brutus, my biggest bull, heavy as regret, tested a sagging post. He leaned, he pawed, he nudged. The rail split with a sound like an old violin string snapping. One by one they flowed through calves tucked behind mother's hooves, clattering onto asphalt like a percussion section. Garden gnomes flew. Tulips flattened. A decorative fountain became a stone pile. It was chaos theater, and let's be honest, poetic. Karen charged across her lawn screaming, "Get them off my property!" And there I was, leaning on a fence phone in my hand, recording the whole thing, feeling oddly calm. The sheriff arrived, looked at the broken fence, looked at the herd calmly grazing, and said something that made the air still. "Ma'am, county code requires a barrier sufficient to deter ingress. I see a failure. Liability's on you." Karen's face went the color of a fresh brand. Animal control and deputies helped herd the animals back. It took patience, a bucket of grain, and a lot of careful waving. When the last calf returned, I shut the inner gate and walked up to the sheriff with my folder. 6 months of records, photos, letters, drone footage, padlock remnants. He skimmed it and nodded. "This will do." By Monday, the town had an opinion. The HOA scrambled. The county attorney cited them for failing to maintain livestock barriers and for interfering with an easement. Homeowners had property damage claims. Insurance bills rose like a bad weed. The boardroom that had been Karen's stage turned into a firing squad, members furious about fines, bad press, and skyrocketing premiums. She lost the presidency in a landslide. They replaced the entire southern fence this time with posts you could hang the flag from. They put my easement rights in writing. I got no apology from Karen, but the law and common sense had done their work. After the dust settled, life went back to its rhythm, mornings with coffee on the porch, afternoons in the pasture. The bison acted like Bison Brutus, king of his herd, sniffing the new fence for curiosities. Folks nodded at me in town with that half smile that says, "I heard you had some unexpected landscapers." I pinned the HOA attorney's letter to my fridge like a small victory flag. If there's a lesson in this, it's simple, and a little bitter patience beats petulance, and arrogance often builds its own trap. I didn't need to break the law. I didn't need violence, just documentation, restraint, and a willingness to let natural consequences roll downhill. Karen lost because she mistook rules for reality, because she thought a padlock could override common sense, because she cared more about control than maintenance. That said, there's a moral that isn't tidy. Boundaries matter on land and relationships at work. If you let people step past them with no consequence, they'll keep stepping. But you don't always have to meet force with force. Sometimes the hardest and most satisfying thing is to step back, document the pattern, and let the result of someone else's choices do the convincing for you. So tell me, was I right to wait and let things unfold, or should I have fought Karen the second she welded that first padlock? Have you ever had someone push a boundary until it broke, and how did you handle it? Share your story. I'd like to hear whether you think the bison got justice, or whether justice itself is just another fence we build when the world gets loud.